2 5s. Spacers, you can use Teflon, you can use metal. It doesn't really matter on the bottom, in my opinion. I've used different types over the years, and again, I've never seen a difference in performance or anything. So what comes next is the spacers on the top, and again, metal, bronze. I just use Teflon. So when I say what's important on the top is, I'll put 40 thousandths worth of Teflon spacers on the top, because once we thread this, or once we put the nut on there, we're going to trim the top of the post off. Now, when we trim the top of the post off, if we put the nut on there and had no spacer, and you trimmed it, then you came back and you went to a track and say you had to add 10 more thousandths between the guide and the chassis, or 20 thousandths, depending on how deep the braid is, you're going to lower the amount of threads that are going to engage with the nut on the top. So it's better to have a little bit of extra thread up top, so if you have to space that guide, you've got good thread engagement. So there's varying nuts out there, and I can tell you that if you use plastic nuts, okay, fine. They're the lightest weight nut you can get. The Sonic grape nut, which is aluminum, and it's quite a bit lower, and it's machined. This is the same weight as the plastic guide nut. Now, the advantage of this over this, plastic, I've seen plastic nuts break. I've seen them where they haven't had very good threads and they kind of back off during the racing. So it's a choice thing. And believe me, I race. I've got cars, I've got grape nuts on. I've got cars, I've got plastic nuts on. Sometimes it's just I use what I got. So on this chassis, we're just going to go with the plastic. So get that started. And I thought I had my guide nut here, my nut driver. Hold on, I'll go get the nut driver. All right, 3/8 nut driver. You want to thread it nice and easy till it bottoms out. And basically, well, we're not quite there yet, but always get it so it barely is, no, barely. But what you want to check is you want to check your guide to make sure you don't have wobble front to back or side to side. And this is pretty nice so far. Now, that's too tight to race. It'll stick on you, but more about that here in a few. So we've got that on there. Now we're going to trim it. And you know, guys, I see them trim them various ways. They'll cut them with side cuts. You can use a soldering iron and heat. You don't want to do that with a plastic nut, though. You're going to melt the nut. But if we had the metal nut on there, you could melt it with, that's old school, melting the plastic with a soldering iron. But we're just going to use a Dremel here real quick. And we're going to flush this off. Alright, so we've got that, and I left a little stubby up top just for a little extra adjustability down the road. Now, depending on what type of body you run, you might need to flush that off more, or even run a shorter nut for body clearance. So, most of the bodies, LMP, GTP, especially stock cars, you got plenty of room up there. So, we've got that. Now's a good time to maybe back back that nut off and make sure you're kind of clean those threads out a little bit. And there you have that. So now we're going to do lead wires. We're going to wire the car. So talk a little bit about guide clips. Guide clips. These are silver-plated TQ clips. You know, there's other brands of silver-plated clips out there. I'm not going to say one's better than the other. There's brass clips. Brass a little bit heavier than the plated clips, but brass clips are usually a little bit stronger. So again, it's a preference thing. Maybe it's all whatever the track has, etc. Clips are clips, in my opinion, as far as the job they do. It's just some are a little bit stronger than others. But I've had pretty good luck with TQ clips. Not had problem with breakage. So we're going to slide the clips in. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put some braid in here to hold the clips in place while we solder on the lead wires. So I just use old braid for this part of the job because you don't want to really ruin an old pair of braid. So something I've been doing lately, again, it's all about trying to build lighter cars. You know, there's two types of lead wire, or well, there's several types of lead wire, but the most common is like an 18 gauge lead wire. This is TQ, 18 gauge copper strand, silicone jacket, and then you get into the 20 gauge wires, which are quite a bit thinner. This is Slick 7 20 gauge. It's thinner, it's lighter, it's a little bit weaker though. So for a while, for a long time, I would run 18 gauge lead wire front to back. Then one day I thought, well, let's try the thinner wire, and took the big wire off, put the thin wire on. Car ran the same speed as far as motor wise. A lot of people tell you little wire doesn't transfer the power like the big power. I guess it depends. I mean, if you're running Group 7 motors, yeah, you want big wire. FK motors, ProSlot FK motors, 16Ds, etc. You can get away with this little wire. Now the big difference, other than strength, is weight. So when I was running 18 gauge wire in my cars all the time, front to rear, one time I took a pair off and I weighed it. It was 3 grams. 18 gauge or 20 gauge in the same length, 1.5 grams. So it was half the weight. This is half the weight of this. So I started running this wire. Well, the problem with this wire is it's very susceptible to being kinked or even broke if it kinks up in this area of the chassis, or it might get sheared off in a wreck. So, what to do? So I started doing what I call a combo wire deal, where the front half that's going to solder up to the guide clip and go through the chassis lead wire retainer is going to be the 18 gauge, and then past the lead wire retainer back to the motor is a 20 gauge. So of course you got to strip both sides of the wire, tin them, and then solder them together. Now on all wire connections you want to use paste flux. Do not use acid flux when you are soldering lead wires to your motor, to your guide clips. Acid flux is a no-no, because acid flux will leach up into the insulation and slowly corrode and eat away the wire, and it'll break. So you got to use paste flux. Paste flux does not eat the wire. So we've got the this combo wire. Now, when this is all trimmed to the right size and everything, this is 2 grams for a set of lead wires versus 3 for all 18 gauge versus 1.5 grams for all 20 gauge. So you're in between on weight. So you're saving a little bit of weight. You've got the advantage of good strong wire in the front not breaking, and this wire back here will never break because it never turns or twists. So first step, or how I do my lead wires, is I put a little bit of paste flux here on the clip. And it just takes just a quick touch to flow that like so. Now I'm going to tin the wire. So I'm going to feed this through here. And then we're going to come over and we're going to do the other wire. Feed that through, and again, I like my tweezers for this stuff. So there's various ways of doing your lead wires, and that again will be in another video, because you can do curly cues, you can do, there's a bunch of different stuff you can do on doing your lead wires, but I'm kind of doing the old school method here. And we're going to put these on. Now I'll take a screwdriver sure that's down on there like so. Okay, so we've got our loop, what I call the loop, this area here. But as you can see, they're off a little bit on angles. So I'm going to tweak that now. And we got to loosen up our nut. And we want to get this to where it springs like this and centers that guide flag. So when you're turned in a slot and you come out, it goes right back to the center. And the marshal can put your car right back in the slot. Now, what we got to do is turn this and see if we're going to pull this wire too tight and stretch or kink, and do it this way. And I can tell you this wire, this side here is perfect. This side needs to come out just a little bit. As a matter of fact, I'm going to change the angle on this a little bit. I'm going to bring this back, because I don't like the way that's angled. So now we're going to pull that back out like so. And you can tell now, see, that's sticking a little bit. Now, we got no wobble, so we're still a little tight on the guide flag. So we got to back it off just a hair. And that's pretty good. Okay, so now we've got those kind of in place. Yep. Well, now we've got these open connections back here, and you can't. That's a short, so you gotta take care of that. So what we do in that deal is we get some heat shrink tubing, and this I believe was 3/8 OD. Let me see here. No, it's 1/8 inch shrink tube. I got it at the local hardware store. So we're going to cut off a couple of pieces, like so. And we're going to cut off another piece, same. Same length. We're going to put that right up against the back side of the lead wire retainer, because that's going to keep from pulling the lead wires towards the front of the car, because we've got this set up and we don't want them to go back or go forward. So we've got that like that. Now we take a lighter and gotta shrink the tube. So there you go. Wires aren't going to go forward. They're insulated. They're not going to short out. And we've got a nice spring. And we've saved some weight. So there. Now we've got car wired. We're ready to put the motor back in. Wait a minute. Yep, that's the 37 that I want in there. Now, I'm going to use paste flux for putting my motor in from now on, because I've got everything tinned. And that's not going to corrode the chassis when you do motor changes. Voila. Got a nice lash there. A little side to side. So now we're going to attach the motor, or the wires, to the motor. So this is a place I see a lot of guys, they run way too much wire. You'll see a car, they'll have all this wire going 92 directions like this. You don't want that. You want these wires to be somewhat down low and then come up on top of the motor. And you may have to put some kinks in there to keep it down there like that, but that's what you want. So that's that side. That wire is not going to get down in the hole in the between and then drag the track. That a race last weekend. Again, a guy had too much lead wire on his car. Lead wire went down below the chassis. Something like this. Not exactly like that, but it went down below the chassis. He had no idea. Car quit running. Picked the car up, wouldn't go. Couldn't figure it out. We looked at the front of the wires and was looking at the motor, and I seen it was cut in two right there, because he wore it in two. So we want the wires not quite on the chassis, but not way above the chassis. We got to have them so they're not going to get below the chassis, but they're not going to be up high in the chassis. And there we go. I mean, this wire here could be pulled over a little bit more, but again, if you put the motor, smaller gear in there, and the motor goes back, you need a little room for that too. So you got to take everything into consideration. So basically, other than putting tires on this car and a couple of, axle spacer probably on this side, depending on what size or what brand hubs you use. Some hubs are wider than others. You might need 2 spacers. I know a Mossetti car, the way you see this, and if you're trying to get 83 millimeters, which is the USRA and FNRS maximum width, 225,000 spacers over here. If you're doing 3 1/4, just 1 spacer over here with alpha hubs. JK hubs, no spacers. You're going to be pretty close right on the money for 3 1/4. Probably 1 spacer for 83 millimeter. So tires, new braid, mounting the body. It's a race car. And that, my friends, is how we set up a Mossetti. Now, one last thing that I do on a Mossetti car is I will add my piece of tape across the front of the pans. And this works for me almost on every track, but after I get anything in, I make sure everything's centered. We got same spacing here and here. It's centered front to rear. Come up right there where the pan makes the radius. I put the tape on there. I press her down real good. Trim off the excess. And there you go. This is the same exact setup that won at the USRA Nats in a Mossetti Patriot in the GTP class, and it's the same setup that just recently won at the FNRS race down in Durham, North Carolina. So, like I said, body, tires, new braid, time to track test. So, when you run the car on the track, and I talked about braid depth and guide spacing earlier, and I have a Sharpie here. When you run your car on the track, you're going to pick up rubber that's on the track, and the rubber is black. And to give you an example, here's a chassis that's been run, and you can see the black here. Well, maybe you can't see it. It just depends on this camera. But you've got a little bit here, not so much over here, and you've got some in this area here. And this actually looks like some paint or something from the track. So what you're looking for, and I call that mud. That tire rubber buildup on the bottom of the car, I call that mud. Now, the time you practice earlier in the day to the time your race might be later in the day, as the track builds up with rubber, it's actually rubber on top of the track surface building up. So, earlier in the day, you probably spaced your car to where you just barely want these tips to have rubber on them. And maybe a little bit here, maybe a little bit here. But you want your car to basically kind of touch the track in the turns when the chassis is flexing or wanting to kind of two-wheel out. And you want these to be slightly rubbered up, mudded up. Now, if this is really heavy all through here and even back to here, you need more guide spacer. You need to probably add 5 thousandths, go out and run the car, come back to your pits, take the guide flag off, put 5 thousandths in, wipe the bottom of the chassis clean, lighter fluid and a towel or a paper towel, go back out and run the track. You should be able to see that you're picking up less rubber. Okay, if you're still pretty heavy, you need to add more spacer. What you're looking for is, like I said, a little bit of pickup to basically very little. If your car handles excellent and this is all clean with no rubber, that's what you really want, because then you know your car's not dragging anywhere and it's handling good. So sometimes you gotta pick up that little bit of rubber for your car. When your car is really handling good, it will pick up a little bit of rubber, I should say. So it's just something you have to test and tune. And so let's say in the morning you've got your car nice and clean, out there running it, handles great, it's clean, it's not picking up any rubber on the track. Your race, after they've run 5 or 6 races on the track, you put your car out there and you're running, you're picking up rubber, you're okay, because you're just scraping the rubber off the top of the track. You're not really dragging the track, you're just scraping rubber off the track. And again, that's what you want too. So, but if you're practicing and then racing, and your car handles good and you're not picking any rubber up, then that's ultimately what you want. But if you're picking up a little bit of rubber, and then you're racing, you're picking, and you're getting more black, well, you're probably just scraping the track. So there's just a difference in knowing whether you're dragging the track or cleaning the rubber off. And you want to clean the rubber off, you don't want to drag the track. So dragging the track is a couple of problems as far as if you're too low and you're dragging, it might make your car handle worse than what it would if it was up a little higher. So again, it's something you got to play with. So I want to say I've kind of covered it all here. See there, see that's not good now that I'm playing with that. So what we got to do is we're just going to heat this wire up and just put a little different angle there, and see it's not going to fall down in there now. So that's just things you got to look out for when you're prepping, to make sure that stuff like that can't happen and cause you a problem in the race. So other than that, I know I probably didn't cover everything, but if you have any questions or comments or seen something that you want to know more about, just message on the Between the Lanes Facebook page, because the link will be there for this video on YouTube. You just send in your questions there on Facebook, Between the Lanes, and I'll answer any questions or clear up any confusion. And look forward to some more videos coming. Like I said, I'm going to do one on setting gear mesh, threading guide flags, a little more on the lead wires probably. We got some body mounting videos, body trimming videos coming. A lot of stuff in the works, and we kind of do them as we're prepping to go to races. So what you see is what we're going to go race. So these 2 chassis that I'm working on right now are going to be used this coming weekend. But when you see this video, these chassis will be ran before the video is publicized. So we'll let you know on the next episode of Between the Lanes, episode number 8. We'll let you know how these cars worked at the race this weekend, and hopefully you've learned some things, and hopefully I've got your mind thinking and how you can improve your car, improve your racing. And that's all I have for now. So thanks for tuning in and watching, and look for us on the next episode of Between the Lanes.